Colonization, as understood by scholars, refers to a process or phenomenon by which people belonging to a nation establish colonies in other societies while retaining their bonds with the parent nation and exploit the colonized societies to benefit the parent nation and themselves. Simply put, the process of establishing colonies is called colonization, and the policy of using colonization to increase one's footprint is called colonialism. At least 4 forms of colonialism are recognized, namely exploitation colonialism, settler colonialism, surrogate colonialism, and internal colonialism, the first 2 being the most well known. In exploitation colonialism, the colonizing group treats the colonized territory primarily as a resource to further its economic growth and increase the dominion under its control without actually settling in the colony. In settler colonialism, the colonizers not only retain their bonds with their parent nation but also settle in large numbers in the colony and take over all aspects of the colonized society, thereby reducing the natives to a secondary status. Coloniality refers to the fundamental element or thought process that informs the policy of colonialism and advances the subtler end goal of colonization, namely colonization of the mind, through complete domination of the culture and worldview of the colonized society. In short, coloniality is the fount of the policy of colonialism that results in colonization, whose ultimate objective is to mold the subjugated society in the image of the colonizer. Therefore, implicit in the use of coloniality is cultural coloniality, which represents its all-encompassing character. This process of culturally dominating the colonized society may be termed colonialization, which is different from the overt process of colonization. Although the world has seen other forms of colonization and hence coloniality, prior to the European version, which the literature on coloniality acknowledges, the use of the term coloniality in the literature is primarily with reference to European colonization. In other words, unless indicated otherwise, coloniality means not just cultural coloniality but European cultural coloniality, while the response of erstwhile colonized societies, primarily Latin American, to European cultural coloniality in order to reclaim their agency over their consciousness and subjectivities has been termed decoloniality. Scholars agree that every society has the right to define coloniality and therefore decoloniality for itself based on its decoloniality for itself based on its own history and experience. However, the general consensus appears to be that all of the sources and forms of colonialism and coloniality the world has witnessed, none equals the European version, specifically Western European colonialism, in its reach, omnipresence, and recorded longevity, which continues to affect both erstwhile colonized societies and the rest of the world. To be clear, in discussing European colonialism and coloniality, the literature includes Western imperialism, since the latter is seen as the descendant of and the successor to European colonialism. Consequently, scholars have directed their energies at understanding the coloniality of European colonialism as well as its successor, Western imperialism, both of which have been collectively referred to as Eurocentrism or Western centrism or Western normativism or North Atlantic abstract universal fictionalism. The origins of Eurocentrism spawned by European colonialism and coloniality have been traced to what has been referred to as the Age of Discovery or Exploration in the 15th century, when Christopher Columbus set out in 1492 to discover the New World, namely the non-Christian world. Columbus's voyage marked the beginning of European colonization and heralded a new chapter in European history, which led to the emergence of new conceptions of time, space, and subjectivity that had tectonic implications for that continent and, most importantly, for others, that is, the rest of the world. In fact, the investigative spirit of the Renaissance, which is believed to have started in the 14th century, is credited to have laid the foundations for the Age of Discovery. The Age of Discovery significantly overlapped with the Renaissance, which was followed by the Reformation, leading to the Treaty of Westphalia in 1648, which was in turn followed by what is treated as the zenith of European civilization, the Age of Enlightenment or Reason, and the Industrial Revolution. The use of "the" for each of these essential European milestones by Europeans and the rest of the world is significant, since it demonstrates the universalization of European history as the history of humanity, in particular its modern history. Specifically, The period between the 15th and 19th centuries is believed to have given birth to modernity and several modern concepts and ideas that are unconsciously accepted not only by Europe but also the rest of the world, including erstwhile colonized societies, which proudly, albeit unfortunately, based their contemporary discourse on such modern ideas. These modern ideas have significantly affected and altered conceptions of nature, universe, human agency, religion, race, language, political organization of societies, the nature of state, its relationship with religion, conceptions of law and human rights, treatment of genders, science, notions of development, and more across the globe. During the period of colonization, European provincialism on each of these facets of life was introduced, rather imposed, and universalized in colonized societies, thereby replacing indigenous worldviews. Since all of this has been traced by scholars to Columbus's expedition of 1492, the expedition and its significance for world history has engendered a raging debate. One school of thought, the modern school, believes that Columbus's voyage was and must be seen as a glorious and heroic achievement that marked the beginning of the Christian West's destiny to liberate non-Christian indigenous societies from their wretched existence. The second school of thought, the postmodern school, is seen as a response to Europe's claims over modernity and rejects the grand narratives woven around it. However, this school's opposition to modernism is largely in the realm of culture. The third school, namely the post-colonial school, which enjoys a significant overlap with postmodern thought and even draws from it too, rejects the universalizing claims of Eurocentrism, albeit in the political realm. However, it uses the very same tools as the colonizer instead of deconstructing and questioning colonial presumptions. For instance, while the post-colonial school focuses on the local, it tries to universalize the local, thereby falling prey to the same universalizing tendency of colonialism. In other words, the post-colonial school certainly changes the content of the discussion but not the terms of engagement or the framework of the discussion, having imbibed the European penchant for universalization. The limitations of the post-colonial school, among other things, lie in its inability to see and comprehend the continued contemporary impact of colonial structures even after decolonization. The fourth school, namely the decolonial school, akin to post-colonialism, challenges European universalisms, particularly in the political realm. It too believes that Columbus's voyage marked the beginning of one of the most repressive, bloody, racist, and genocidal chapters ever witnessed in human history that led to the extinction of several cultures and critically wreaked havoc on nature on an unprecedented scale. However, where the decolonial school differs from post-colonial thought is its identification of the element of coloniality, which, according to it, informed European colonization that began with the Age of Discovery. According to decolonial thought, European coloniality gave birth to the cultural complex of modernity and rationality, apart from the modern categories of religion and race. Importantly, according to the decolonial school, post-colonialism gives the impression that the colonial mindset or consciousness ended with decolonization, when in fact it has survived decolonization and continues to impact decolonized or independent societies. Also, the decolonial school rejects the totalizing universalist claims of Europeanism in a much more balanced fashion. That is, instead of treating the European position as the sole universal benchmark, decoloniality prefers to treat it as but one of the options or subjectivities within the global pool of thought. Therefore, it rejects Europe's monopoly over time, space, and subjectivity. It is important to understand these critical distinctions because it is easy to conflate and confuse the decolonial position with the post-colonial. Decolonial scholars have gone a step further to claim that while post-colonialism is a state of affairs, decoloniality is a state of mind, just as coloniality is. These finer aspects will be discussed in some detail in the ensuing portions of this section of the book after the examination of coloniality as conceptualized and understood by the decolonial school. According to the decolonial school, the celebration of the Age of Discovery by proponents of Europeanism, that is European supremacism, is understandable because the period was preceded by the Dark Ages for a millennium for Europe. However, since the rest of the world did not live in the Dark Ages prior to the 15th century, the celebration of the age of discovery by several erstwhile colonized societies is truly tragic and naive. This is because it shows that such societies have not even scratched the surface to understand the racial and religious supremacist character of the age of discovery and the European milestones that followed it, including the Enlightenment. I love this section because this shows that Indian intellectuals who also glorify the age of discovery therefore feel the need to downplay the achievements of Indian society prior to the age of discovery of Europe. That is why they are so hell-bent and so focused on Satipratha and caste problems, because they think if they prove that Indian society was also in a dark age before the age of discovery, then they get to say that, see, dark ages lifted you up from darkness. The age of discovery lifted you up from darkness. So you have to be humble and thankful towards European age of discovery and the age of enlightenment and renaissance, even reformation. This is because it shows that such societies have not even scratched the surface to understand the racial and religious supremacist character of the age of discovery and the European milestones that followed it, including the Enlightenment. They are oblivious to the impact of the Enlightenment on their ability to evaluate their own histories and cultures, sans the shame, judgment and sanctimony induced by it. Decoloniality, therefore, seeks to restore the dignity of indigeneities and their subjectivities by unshackling them from the absolutism of European coloniality. These are the broad premises that inform the decolonial scholarship, which must be borne in mind even while discussing region or country-specific experiences with European colonialism and coloniality. It is these foundational premises of the decolonial school that warrant attention and makes its understanding imperative for decolonized societies which are still grappling with coloniality. Interestingly, decolonial scholarship seems to have emanated from Latin America, which has contributed significantly to the understanding of coloniality and the response to it. In fact, the better part of the scholarship largely revolves around the Americas, which includes North Americas, South and Latin America, and the Caribbean, followed by Africa. One would have expected Asian countries to lead the charge on this front, given that the continent is home to living civilizations and indigenous culture systems that have survived several forms of colonialism, not just the European variant. In fact, the continued survival of these living civilizations makes them the prime targets of coloniality in its present form, namely Western imperialism, and this makes the Asian voice all the more important from the standpoint of currency, and yet Asia is not at the forefront of decolonial scholarship, which could indicate a deep-seated continuing and unconscious coloniality in Asian societies, notwithstanding the survival of their cultural systems. This, as we shall see, is attributable to the predominance of post-colonial thought in Asia and the Middle East, especially Bharat and Palestine. Also, the literature that exists on Asia in relation to coloniality from a decolonial perspective, even where it presents a subjective and contextual view of the Asian experience with coloniality, appears to imitate the work on the Americas and Africa. It is true that there are broad similarities in the colonial experience across continents, given the near identical aims, actions, and underlying coloniality of European colonizers regardless of their nationalities. However, this should not have limited voices from Asia or voices that discuss Asia from capturing the diversity and peculiarity of their colonial experience better, so as to contribute to the still nascent pool of decolonial thought. Such an endeavor is overdue and would in fact be consistent with decolonial thought, since a universalizing approach to decoloniality would defeat its stated objective. In other words, decoloniality by definition accepts and underscores the need for subjectivity, contextuality, and local resistance to abstract universal definitions. This is precisely why societies and civilizations of Asia can and must craft for themselves their own definitions of coloniality and decoloniality without being fettered or limited in any manner by the experience and conclusions of the Americas and Africa. One of the reasons I believe that the Asian experience could impact the way of colonialism, coloniality, and decoloniality are perceived is because while almost the entirety of the Americas and close to half of Africa have been converted to the religion of the European colonizer, and about 40% to Islam, this is not the case with vast swaths of Asia. In stark contrast, the practice of pre-colonial faith systems by quite a few quite a few countries of Asia, such as Bharat, makes them living indigenous civilizations to a significant extent. This makes a critical difference, since decolonial scholarship, while being aware of the theological origins of European coloniality, appears to focus primarily on its racial aspects. This could be because in the geography of origin of decolonial thought, namely the Americas, colonized societies have become almost entirely Christian. In other words, the preoccupation of decolonial scholarship with race and its reluctance to address religion with the same degree of candor may be attributed to the fact that the regions that have produced much of the scholarship on coloniality so far follow the religion of the colonizer, namely Christianity. Their demographic reality, perhaps, offers an explanation as to their gaze being more alive to race than to religion, since reclaiming their indigenous religious identities may seem impossible despite having embarked on their decolonial journeys. Given the huge Christian settler colonial populations in the Americas in particular, the numbers may not even be conducive for indigenous peoples, even if they wanted to revert to the faith of their ancestors. And if this were not enough, pragmatic considerations such as the highly organized and evangelical nature of Christianity and its status as a global majority have a direct and real bearing on the ability of any erstwhile non-Christian colonized society to reclaim and return to its roots.